Welcome to the Ultimate Dental Podcast, the place where you can learn how to create a dental practice and a business life that you love. Listen in with Dr. David Moffet as he interviews successful entrepreneurs and successful business people and successful dentists as they share their business successes, their stories, and their breakthrough ideas. Sharing pearls of wisdom that you can take back to your practice and implement immediately so that you can have that great practice with more patients, higher profits, and less stress. This is the podcast where great dental practices meet with successful business processes. Thanks for tuning in to the Ultimate Dental Podcast, the podcast where thought leaders, industry experts, and thriving practice owners reveal their very best tips, tools, and strategies that will help you to grow your dental practice faster. Now, here's your host, Dr. David Moffet.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the Ultimate Dental Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. David Moffet. I'm here in Burrowang, New South Wales, as you well know, and always gives me great pleasure to talk to somebody in my own time zone, but gives me great pleasure to talk to Alison Smith, who's in Victoria, in Gisborne, which is just outside of Melbourne. Alison, welcome to the Ultimate Dental Podcast. Good to have you
Thanks, David. Great to be here.
Good to have you. Now, Alison, you are a certified mental fitness coach. You have a postgraduate diploma in psychology, and I came across you on a dental webinar, a webinar that was attended by dentists, because you were talking about a subject which is not commonly talked about in dentistry, but needs to be, and that is handling burnout and making life for dentists more enjoyable. Now, as this audience of this podcast is mainly for dentists, they'll understand that. But if we mention that to the general public, they say, well, easy for dentists to make their lives more enjoyable, just count their money. And that's not always the case either, because there are business stresses and in running a business. Tell me, you've spoken with a couple of dentists, dental practices, and helped them in the whole practice, not just the dentist, but also other team members as well, because everybody has a stress in business. I like some of the things that you said, but how did you get into dentistry as a person with, who is a certified mental fitness coach?
Sure. Well, Gisborne Family Dental, which is a wonderful practice here in Gisborne, they reached out to me to help their staff in one of their professional development days, which they run annually. So I chatted to the business owners, Jacob and Rachel, lovely people, about some of their business needs and the main sort of stresses that they find in their practice. We came up with some solutions to help target those. And at the end of the day, a lot of the stresses are the same. They're the same. We're all human beings, right? That's what sort of binds us. So we all have a degree of stress in our life, and we live in a very fast-paced modern society with constant demands and expectations, both at work and at home. No one gives us the tools, though, to help navigate those increased stresses that we live in this modern life. A lot of the discussions were around how to address stress so that we don't have so much stress that we reach the point of burnout, which no one wants to get to. That's not fun for anybody. And if you can reduce stress or help to understand stress and therefore manage your own stress, you can live a much healthier and happier life as a business owner. Also in the business, you can be a happier and healthier employee, and that helps your business thrive, and it helps you thrive at home as well. Yeah, so it all sort of boils down, in my opinion, to leading a really, really busy life, and no one generally gets the time to actually stop and think about what's going on today, what even happened today. We sort of get stuck on life's hamster wheel. So unless we have that time to stop and reflect, we can't really sort of address what's going on and then what we want in our lives. How do we want to exist in this world?
Yeah, a lot to unpack in that opening statement, Alison, which is great. When I heard you on the webinar for Dental Innovations and that group of dentists, you identified that there's stress, anxiety, and burnout, and each of those are different. But you also said, and it grabbed my attention, that in life, there are stresses that we need. So we have good stresses and bad stresses. Let's start talking about stress, anxiety, and burnout, and what are the differences between those three? Because sometimes people can think that they've got stress, but they've actually got anxiety, or they've actually experiencing a burnout. So
Yeah.
let's get your definition of those three things, and then we'll unpack those individually if that works.
Yeah, sure. Well, they all have a relationship with each other and they do overlap. But anxiety is that sort of constant, intense, and persistent worry or thought. So sometimes that's commonly referred to as a racing mind. So it's really hard to stop the mind or slow down the mind. Stress is technically defined as a physical, mental, or emotional sort of strain or tension, which is very, very, very broad, but it is. And yes, you're right, we do need stress in our life to achieve certain things that are new or things that are challenging us. We do need stress to help us achieve those things. Burnout is often a result of persistent stress. So when our bodies don't have the ability to reduce stress, we're running on this consistent stress, and that has a biological effect on both our bodies and our minds. And that's where we can reach burnout, which is technically emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion, and can really be detrimental. So we always want to try and avoid getting to that point of burnout, and we have to do that by addressing the anxiety and stress.
Yeah, I love that definition, anxiety and the racing mind. I've got a client, when they bring an area of concern at their practice to me, uh, I like getting the area of concern, and then I like working back to where the real problem is. To me, that's, if you can solve the real problem, then everything downstream is solved by solving the real problem. But this client in particular, and I hope they don't identify themselves when they watch this back, but they probably will. This client then takes the problem that they brought, before they brought it to me, they've already gone through 5 different scenarios and the mind map of those scenarios. So way too much overthinking of what could possibly happen if. And we get down to things that might be 1% or 2% chance of happening, as opposed to that problem, if we fix it, we've squashed everything that can happen anyway. But most of the time, if we fix it, then the 1 and 2% never happen anyway. We just keep the majority of things as possible. And that's really scary when I get that feedback back from them, that they've already been wasting time and creating more anxiety in themselves by thinking, oh, if this happens, if this happens, if this happens. Is that, I've tried not to identify the gender, but is that a gender specific sort of behavior?
No, definitely not. It can happen to absolutely anybody and everybody. The racing mind, our brains are actually negatively biased. That's the way we are built as human beings. So for every one positive thought we have, we generally have 4 negative thoughts. And that's a protective mechanism that's built into us. So the mind is always going to bring up worst case scenarios, what if, all possibilities. The mind is naturally always going to do that. But once you recognize that, you can then help break down those thoughts and say, I'm having this negative thought. What's the reality of this actually happening? What's the chance of this actually happening? What is the worst thing that could happen if this happened? And then sort of working from there. I think I did read a stat the other day, but don't quote me because I can't exactly remember, but I think it was 11%, only 11% of our worries generally come true. So it's like 89% of the things that you're worrying about are never, ever going to happen. That's just your brain's protective mechanisms kicking in, trying to keep you safe because that's its job. But unfortunately, it's not biased to any gender. Everyone can experience a racing mind.
Well, that's an interesting thought, that concept of 11 and 89%. And that's usually what happens at a family dinner table discussion or a group of friends discussing, and somebody says, hey, I'm going to do this. And nearly the majority put a negative spin on this person's positive thought. And often that they think it's negatives. Often they actually are worried that if their friend succeeds or their family member succeeds, that they'll leave that group and become a different person and they'll miss them. And that's a scary thought as well. But if that's going on in those environments, in groups of friends and groups of family meeting, that does kind of fester a negative thought pattern. And it's funny as you were saying this, because I would say that if I have a thought, I just think of the positive 75% of the time. Rarely do I think, of anything that's not going to work, or I dismiss it very quickly. And I have heard a thought that successful people make their decisions quickly and change them rarely, and less successful people make their decisions slowly and then change them often. And so they then start just spinning their wheels. But let's get back to stress and burnout. And as you said, there is good stress, and when we go to the gym, it's not the first repetition that makes the muscle grow. It's that last repetition when the muscle's under stress. And so we do need those sort of stresses to help us improve, our fitness levels for a start, but also, I guess, for our brain. If our brain can overcome a stress and then agree that the stress wasn't as bad as they thought, then that helps that brain then to do that activity or do that process the next time and the next time. So it becomes a habit rather than a fear. And I guess anxiety is really built on fear and fear of the unknown more than fear of, maybe it's a fear of a previous result, but often it's a fear of the unknown.
Yeah, fear of the unknown. And we do need stress to achieve generally anything new in our lives that we're doing, because as I said, our brain's designed to protect us. So anytime we try something new, signals are going to get sent off in our body and our mind saying, what on earth are you doing? Why are you doing this? But sometimes, we can obviously help overcome those thoughts, and that might come down to your why. Like, why are you doing this? Why are you at the gym? Why are you trying to push out 10 reps when it's so hard? And it may be because you've said in your mind, I'm going to do 10 reps. So that's just what you're going to do. So you help sort of overcome that little mental barrier. And then when you do it, that helps build your confidence, and that actually helps rewire your neural pathways. So then, as you said, like habits, the more you do something, those neural pathways are rewired. And that's telling yourself, I can do it. So next time you go to do it, it'll be that little bit less scarier, a little bit less stressful. And that's how new habits are formed.
So let's get back to the dental practice. And I know you've identified them, and I guess they won't mind. When you went there to help the team and the whole practice, so you're helping the owners, you're helping the employed dentist or the associate dentist, the hygienist, and then the dental staff, the front office team members, and then the back office team members as well. And the perception from people from the outside is that they're all pretty much the same. But internally, people have different roles, but they're all important roles. Just as in the army, there's the foot soldiers, and then you've got the generals and the other rankings in between. Everybody's got a role that has people dependent on them, and as a result, dependent on what they achieve. And so what were the stress levels that you found in each of those categories of dental practice employee or dental practice person that they had, that you were able to help those people with those stresses?
Well, I won't speak specifically to Gisborne Family Dental because I don't want to single them out, but as a collective with the practices that I've worked with, the general underlying theme, one of the main themes was always how to deal positively with perhaps difficult patients when you're very busy. So you might have a patient that's continually talking to you, but you've got the phone ringing, you've got someone walking in the front door, and you've got a dentist asking you for something. Do you know what I mean? So most of it was how to deal with those busy situations when you're keeping in mind, your job, what you need to be doing at the end of the day. And also a common theme was just around that, I suppose, expectation of being able to still perform your role, and this is at any level, in a really busy practice. Busy practice was a sort of consistent thing that came up. Practices are busy. They need to run to a schedule. Patients come in and expect to be seen at a certain time for a certain period of time, but that doesn't mean that's always going to go to plan. So it was sort of about how to help manage with the internal stress that you're feeling in those situations to help you still be able to do your role to the best of your ability.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. It's funny that you mentioned, like, for somebody working at the front desk, they're dealing with a face-to-face customer in a conversation, which may be a business conversation, planning treatment, planning an appointment, discussing fees, all of those sorts of things where two people need to be focused on what they're saying, both the employee and the patient, so that the patient understands what they have to do next, what they're getting done, and what will happen if they don't do it. And often that last one is not covered by dental practices at all. And so they just tell the patient, you're coming back for a filling. And then the patient says, well, it's not hurting, so I'm not coming back. And the patient is self-discharged. And then the practice has created this extra workload of having to do reactivation of people who've cancelled appointments, but they still have treatment outstanding. And it comes back to the fact that they didn't set it up with, if you don't do this, this is what's going to happen. It's going to get worse. It doesn't stay the same. It's not like cleaning the garage.
Wow.
Dentistry is very easy to explain when you say it's not like cleaning the garage, where you close the door, come back in a month, not really much has happened in there.
Yeah.
But in here, come back in a month and there's a whole pile of stuff. In fact, I heard a hygienist say the other day, he was working in a government clinic where the parents were saying, oh, really? Does my child need a general anaesthetic? We need to think about it. And he said, hang on. He said, if your child had a broken arm, would you go away and think about it? Or would you get the arm fixed? And they go, yeah, get the arm fixed straight away. Well, he says, well, this is a broken mouth. And you need to treat the mouth as part of the body because it's affecting how they eat, how they smile, there's pain going on and it's getting worse. And I go, oh, okay. And again, not many dentists and dental practices actually do the hard call with patients about what's really going to happen if they don't. And the other thing in dentistry, which affects how dentists and dental staff behave, is that for the paying patient, paying, P-A-Y-I-N-G, not the P-A-I-N patient, and there's two of those, the one in pain and the one who is a pain, but the one paying, it's expensive. Dentistry costs a significant amount of money. When you think that little tiny little filling costs $300 or a crown can cost $1,500, it's only this big, and you can get an iPhone for $1,500. It's kind of like, really? Do I have to pay that much? And so then dentists actually aren't conditioned to sell the treatment that is needed because they actually fear that it's affecting the patient's budget. And now we're back on the upward interest rate cycle again. Is it a cycle? And so we get it, instead of dentists being focused on, here's the treatment and this is how much it costs, you work it out, they start getting into, well, this is what you need, but I can do something cheaper, which is never going to last in the long term either, but it makes the dentist or the dental team feel like they're helping the patient when they're actually giving them an inferior choice that lasts less. And most patients don't want to come back when things fail. And so there's a real jumble going on in the dental people's minds as to how do we deal with in relation to treatment. But there's some medical procedures that cost a real lot too that only take a few minutes.
Yeah. With some of the practices I've worked with, we have, it's not directly stress related, but we have also done some workshops on communication, enhanced communication. So with regards to both verbal and non-verbal communication skills that you can take on and learn so that you can put yourself in the best situation to be able to help the patient and get them to understand what you're telling them that they need and sort of agree with you and take them to that next step. So yeah, it's not directly stress related, but just having those high level communication skills so that the patient, acknowledges you, respects you, trusts you, and then you can take them on that journey with you about what they need.
Well, I think I agree 100% with what you've said. What I would say back to you is that the communication is so important because poor communication creates more stress. And so not having the skills and not learning the skills of being able to tell the patient how much it's going to cost, tell them what they need. I remember telling my wife once, I was so disappointed that I had to tell a patient that they were going to lose a tooth. And she said, imagine if you're an oncologist and you had to tell them they were going to die. That's far more stressful than lose a tooth. And cost-wise, lose your life, that's it, it's over. But lose a tooth, it can be replaced. There is a replacement for it. And so back in my early days, I remember somebody saying, you've got to be able to, as a dentist, you've got to be able to look people in the eye and tell them, this is the price, and not defer to somebody else. Oh, I don't know the prices. Yeah. And if you don't know the prices, ballpark figure. You've got to give them some idea of what it is. You've got to know that. But the other thing which I learned and I adapted it was that if you can't look them in the eye, just look them in the bindi, as I would say. Pretend they've got a coloured dot on their forehead between their eyebrows, and just look there, because they can't tell whether you're looking them in the eye or looking at just above the bridge of their nose, and that works really well. But you've got to be able to do that, and
sure.
that gives you posture. And without that posture, then you have stress and anxiety. And I
Yeah.
worked for a dentist many years ago. He didn't like to take money. So when he was one staff member down, he would come and be my assistant, and my assistant would go and take the money. Crazy. And he was the owner. And it was and things were cheap back then too. It's just weird. But anyway, it's about these avoiding things that cause stress, learning how to overcome that stress and manage your stress, learning how to manage your anxiety, not move off them, because come back to them if you feel that it's relevant, because we're going to talk about the burnout. And that's really sad in dentistry, because burnout that's not managed can be catastrophic for some dentists. I always despised the patients and friends and non-friends who would just tell me, "Oh, I hear dentists have the highest suicide rate," which is not true. I think it's the military, but I know of dentists who have taken their own lives, and it may be because of dentistry and the stress created, or the expectation, or it may be that along their journey in dentistry, they've started to, have substance abuse, even if it's just alcohol addiction, drug addiction, and that can then put them on a downward spiral. And any loss of life is tragic. So how do we identify that we're on the edge of burnout as dentists and dental people, and what are the best ways to address that and end that, cut that path, block that path, and get back to some form of normality in the mind as well as in the processes of living?
Yeah, burnout's really sad, and it's really serious and really significant, and it is present in many, many industries, but I have heard that it's quite prevalent in the dental industry, sadly. I think if we go back to the basic definition of burnout, which is that emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion. Sometimes the symptoms appear differently in different people. The most sort of common symptom is generally emotional numbness. So you may not feel things that you used to feel. Also, complete physical exhaustion, whether that's problems with sleeping, having trouble getting out of bed in the morning, or the opposite, you can be oversleeping. So I think recognizing those symptoms, and I would strongly recommend that you go and speak to a mental health professional or call up Lifeline or one of the great online mental health support services. Beyond Blue as well is another great one. Even just to have a chat to say, look, I think I'm heading in the direction of burnout. What can you tell me? And those trained professionals will be able to help you. But as burnout is the accumulation of consistent stress day in, day out, stress becomes what we call distress. We can't escape from the stress. And stress is also a biological, has a biological effect on our body. So it can have your heart racing at a high heart rate. It can increase your blood pressure. It actually sends all of the blood away from your brain and out to your external limbs, because if you think back when we were created as such, I suppose, we need to be able to run fast to get away from our predators. So the blood rushes to our limbs. So it's rushing away from our brains, which is one of the things that creates that brain fog, lack of concentration. So it has this real strong biological effect on our bodies. And that can obviously impact your ability to think clearly at work and to make rational decisions, whether you sort of recognize that or not. It also weakens your immune system. So often if you're experiencing stress a lot, you may have sniffles a lot or get a cold quite frequently. Persistent headaches as well is another one, heart tremors. And obviously, because our brains and our guts are directly connected, might have any sort of stomach problems, which is a whole range of issues that you may have there. So it really affects people in a biological way that then sort of has that cognitive and emotional impact. So in my experience, it's great to treat it as a biological problem and treat it with a biological solution initially. And that's like so when we have stress, there's sort of two stress response systems that are activated in our body. There's a HPA axis system, and then there's our sympathetic nervous system. And both of those systems get activated when we have stress, and it then releases signals to our body to tell it to release all sorts of hormones and neurotransmitters. And what we need to do is we need to shut that down and reverse that so that we then sort of return our bodies back to that state of equilibrium, and then we can sort of move forward. And doing that in a biological way, the quickest way you can do that is with your breath. And what that does is it flicks off essentially your sympathetic nervous system, and it switches on the opposing system, which is your parasympathetic nervous system. You may have heard these referred to as your like fight or flight response, or your rest and relax response. So you can just takes 30 seconds if you are feeling, it also helps with your racing thoughts, or if your heart's beating quickly and you're getting the sweaty palms. You do an inhale for, say, the count of 4, and then you do an exhale for the count of 6, or slightly longer than your inhale. And you try and relax the body when you do that. And if you do that 3 or 4 times, that helps switch your sympathetic nervous system off and bring your parasympathetic nervous system back onto line to help reduce the stress hormones and reactivate the positive hormones that we need in our body to help sort of return our body to a state of equilibrium. So that's the sort of first biological thing that you can do to help counteract those biological things that are happening as soon as you are feeling that stress. Yeah. There's also often some of the most common responses to stress that I've seen are things that do help shut down or numb the way we're feeling. So that's why drug and alcohol is very prevalent with people who are experiencing stress consistently. Because when you consume alcohol or drugs, it slows down and shuts off your prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for your decision making and your rational thinking. And you may, for those who have, do drink or take drugs, you'll recognize that sort of let down feeling that you get when it does enter your system, like everything just feels a bit more calm. It does help you relax. And that is the problem. It does help you relax. So it actually does work. The problem is it works short term. It doesn't work long term. It creates more problems. Having those substances in your body affects your sleep, obviously affects the way that you think, and they then have a big flow and effect all other areas of your life. If you don't get adequate sleep, your sleep is when your body does all its repair work. So if you don't get your adequate sleep, you're not repairing all of your bodily systems, which is another reason why you do get sick. You can't think properly the next day, and it sort of has that cycle that sort of, you just continue in this negative spiral. So unfortunately, drugs and alcohol do help in that short term, helping you feel a little bit better short term, but they cause more problems in the long term. The other one is workaholism, is often an immediate response to stress, because especially as a business owner, your to-do list is never ending. There's always something else you can do. So if you're feeling stressed, you might be like, I'll just do this next thing. I'll just stay back and do this. I won't take my break. I'll just do this. And yes, that does help short term. Does not help you long term, because it doesn't give your body and your mind a chance to rest and return back to equilibrium, which is when we can do our best work. So it helps short term, but not long term.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack there. I like the fact that you mentioned sleep as being important, because we all know of some people who need more sleep than others and choose that, and other people who can survive on less sleep. How does that work?
Well, look, it's like with any rule. There's a general guideline as to what is research backed and what is suggested, but there's always going to be exceptions to every rule. There may be people that can live off 3 hours sleep. I'm definitely not one of them. The general research backed consensus is sort of 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep, which means no alcohol, drugs, caffeine in your system when you go to sleep, and no things waking you up during the night, children, animals, loud noises, room temperatures. Like in an ideal world, that is what is said to be the optimal sleep scenario for adults.
Yeah, that's, I've got a friend who's 7.5 minimum in his late 70s, and yet he packs so much into the rest of the day in terms of exercise and work as well. I don't understand. I don't understand how he can get 7.5 hours sleep when you see the list of what he does in terms of fitness and exercise, but he does. When I remember being at school and away on a school camp, and there was a teacher there he said, I've just conditioned my body to to survive on 4 hours sleep. And I thought, how does he do that? I tend to get less than 6. I think six is probably my average. Sometimes it can be less. I try to go to bed earlier now, but I do feel better after a good night's sleep, if that's possible. But yeah, what is it? In at 10 and out at 6. To me, that's a long sleep. But I don't resist sleep now when I'm tired. But I do feel better because of it. So I guess that releases my stress. Anxiety is something I rarely feel at all. And burnout, I guess physically I've had burnout. I feel like I've got an old man's body compared to other people my age. Arthritis is not a pleasant condition when you've got it, but there's no cure for it, so it's just medication, I guess. Let's go back to people at work. How do we work with people who obviously have a different stress level than us? And when we see them, how can we help them in a dental practice to improve themselves so that they can stay in the dental practice rather than to just surrender and leave the dental practice? Because again, for a dental practice owner, staff turnover is diabolical in such a small employment base. You work for a big department store or a big retail chain, they've got spare people there when people are off sick and injured. But in dentistry, you really need everybody to turn up and do their job. And when 1 out of 4 is gone, all of a sudden, or not present, all of a sudden the team's having to function and do more work that can put stress on the other people. So how do we help people to eliminate the stress that sometimes causes them to take leave that they could possibly work through with assistance at work? That makes sense, that question?
Yeah, it does. It's a very big question. I think there's probably 2 parts to it. The first is with a conversation. Employees like to feel heard. When they feel heard, they feel valued. And when they feel valued, they're more likely, and we don't want to work people to the bone, but they're more likely to go the extra mile for the company. So they need to feel valued and heard. So whether you can have a regular check-in with that person, or whether you just pull them aside and say, hey, I've noticed you've seemed a little bit off, or you haven't seemed yourself. Is everything okay? How are you? Talk to me. And if that's the practice owner having that conversation, that's difficult to have, probably emotionally, because you may not be equipped to have that conversation. And also from a time point of view, because if you're talking to a staff member, you're not seeing a client or tending to another business need. But your people are your business. Your people are what is going to help you succeed. I think, chatting to that person and opening up that dialogue is really, really important. It may be something you can help them with straight away. They may open up to you, or it may not be something that you can help with. But unless you ask the question, you don't know what's going on for them. It might be something really simple that they say, because this person starts their shift at this time and this is our busy time, I'm never getting my full lunch break. It might be something like that. That's something that you can address and nip in the bud and come up with a plan, yeah? It might be something like, I've just found out my partner has cancer and I can't concentrate. That's a whole nother ball game, yeah? At the end of the day, though, everyone is a human being, and it's just about having a human conversation with empathy. What is going on for you? How are you? What can I do to support you? So I think the conversation aspect is one component. The second component, and that's sort of more a reactive response. The second component is the proactive response, which is creating an environment from the beginning that allows people to not experience stress at work. So creating a nice environment. Generally, if people know what's expected of them and have clear boundaries, clear communication, most people are pretty happy to come in, do their job, know that they've done their job and go home. So clear communication and boundaries is a really important one. And then setting up the practice in a way that makes people happy to be there. If people aren't seeing outside daylight, sunlight, nature during the day, seeing in a box all day, a cold, sterile sort of box, which sometimes these environments do need to be, but there are little ways you can introduce that element of nature or outside, which we actually need for our emotional well-being. So whether it's putting up pictures on the wall of a beach or a rainforest. Like ask your staff what they want to make their space, make them feel happy, make them feel content and enjoy being in this space. If there's no sort of health and safety issues, you could get a work pet in the space. Some people get work pets in their space, like wellbeing dogs, even a greyhound to just sit down. Pets are known to improve overall emotional well-being. Yeah, there's lots of sort of little things you can implement from a proactive point of view as opposed to a reactive point of view to try and create that workspace that's enjoyable for others. But all starts with a conversation like what would you like in this workplace? Even providing free tea and coffee, providing little couch cushions, blankets. What do your staff need? If you can look after your people, make them happy at work, they'll be able to perform better for you and not experience stress, ideally.
You've raised some interesting points there, and you reminded me of a client that I took over that had a dental practice that they worked 6 days a week, and each day started at a different time because they believed that some patients wanted to come early and some patients wanted to come after work. And so they ended at different times. So there was, when you catch the bus or the train, it's Monday to Friday, it's the same timetable. It's not different for different days. The second thing which this practice did was that if they had a rough time, and it was rough for lunch, but if they were running late or there was a patient who needed something and they had a vacancy in the afternoon, they would move the lunch break to the afternoon. And so the total disrespect of their staff in terms of allowing their staff to have some predictability to their day and their week. They didn't know when they were going to get lunch and they didn't know when they were going to get home. And so they're the two biggest complaints from a lot of employees. I don't get my full lunch break and I don't ever get out on time. And, it's like the number one complaint at a golf club is the members complain about the sandwiches more than they complain about the golf course. It's simple things that are easy to fix.
Yeah.
And so getting that dentist to then work to a 9 to 6 consistency every day and have a set lunch break at 1:30 consistent and not change it at all, because this owner didn't see that sometimes their staff might have a doctor's appointment, they might have to meet somebody, they might have to call somebody, and then if their lunch break moves, their whole routine, and that creates more stress as well. Sometimes I think the owners can have a bit of a brain cloud as to whether they're running a prison or whether they're actually running a prison for their staff or whether they're actually running something that their staff respect the structure and give back into the structure as well. And I don't know where that came from, that thought, but I've seen it in more than one practice as well in terms of not respecting the team members' times and parameters as well in terms of getting, especially if they're traveling by public transport, sometimes the times set to start just don't fit in with bus and train transport, if they're in a big city or even a suburban city. So again, respect. And then if you start on this disrespect structure, then it's very hard to grow to respect if the basics aren't covered, I find. So I don't know how that even is a thing in 2026 at all, because people do need predictability. The other issue in dentistry, Alison, and I don't know if it still happens, I beat it out of my clients, is that some of them still employ staff on a casual basis, day by day, and pay them casuals. And so they have no annual leave, they have no sick leave. And again, the human body, as you would know, and as we've discussed already, goes through physical stresses, and sick leave, being able to take a sick day without it affecting us financially, is important. And as dental practice owners, that can affect the physical health of the dentist. Sometimes they just tough it out and work through these things where their body or their mind does need a rest or a break. And so that, again, it's a mindset shift for dentists as practice owners to say, you need to take regular holidays. You need to make sure that when you're away from your practice, you're not checking in mentally to your practice. Sometimes business owners, that's a real issue, isn't it? When they're at work, they're thinking about being on holidays, and when they're at home, they're thinking about being at work. How do we get those? How do we set those parameters for business owners to say, you need to allocate time for rest? Because I think that's a big issue in causing the burnout.
Well, I think firstly, if you're going to work and you're thinking about, I can't wait till my next holiday, then it might be worth having a think about the way you're existing day to day. because you should be able to experience joy in every day and not be thinking about when you get a break. You should be able to create a life for yourself where during the day you're enjoying your space. And when you get to your holiday, you're like, oh, great holiday time. It's not like, oh, I can't wait for my holiday because now I get to rest and rejuvenate. We should be getting to a point where every day we can exist and live and be well. And if that means you need to perhaps adjust your schedule so you're working less 1 hour per day and spending that 1 hour exercising, or breaking it up into 15-minute blocks and making sure you get outside, then isn't that worth it to experience better health daily than to have to work for 11 months only to be like, oh, thank goodness I've made it to the end. Now I get to have a break. So the problem can feel huge and really overwhelming, the problem of, burnout or stress. But if you break it down into really small, simple steps, like what is one tiny thing I could do this week that would help me feel a bit more balanced, or would give me a little bit more time, or would help me with my staff, or whatever it is you're trying to do to create that better practice for yourself and your staff. What is one little thing I could do this week? It might be that you say, hey, for this half hour, none of us are seeing any patients. We're all just going to go into the tea room and have a chat. That might be completely unrealistic. In a month's time, you might be able to schedule it in and it might be realistic. And it's like, yes, that's half an hour of lost revenue on the dollars spreadsheet, but you'll make that money back up in investing in your staff and having well staff who can then come to work well, want to come back to work, don't need to take the sick days. It sort of pays off. So I think it's great to break it down into really small steps and think, what's one small thing I could do this week or next week that will help me stay well, stay healthy, and help those that I work with.
Alison, we've come to the end of our time together today. I'd like to thank you very much for being a guest on the Ultimate Dental Podcast. What's the best way for anybody to get in touch with you if they want to engage with you in terms of the services that you provide dentists as a certified mental fitness coach? Because every dentist needs help to some degree, in my opinion. And if they think they don't, then most of them are in denial. Dentistry is a very stressful, mentally stressful occupation, and it can be easier with the right assistance. So what's the best way for somebody to get in contact with you, Alison?
Thanks, David. You can visit my website, which is arcmaw.com.au. I run a business called ARC Mindset and Wellbeing, and the aim of the business is to educate and empower people to protect their minds and pursue purposeful lives. But if you start there and reach out there, I can definitely help you. I also have social media pages, which is under ARC Mindset and Wellbeing, if you'd like to just follow along for inspiration, education, insights, and to join sort of a group of like-minded people who are looking at improving their well-being and living a better life. But it's definitely possible, and everyone listening today, you are all worth it. Your mental health is worth it. So keep chipping away at it and you'll get there. But yeah, please reach out if you need any support.
Alison, thanks very much for your time today. It's been great talking to you. And for all my viewers and listeners, I'd highly recommend that you reach out to Alison if you're feeling any form of dental stress, dental anxiety, or dental burnout. Talking to Alison is probably going to be something that's going to be of benefit for you, and please reach out. Alison, great having you as a guest today on the Ultimate Dental Podcast. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David.
Thank you for tuning in to another inspiring episode of the Ultimate Dental Podcast. We appreciate each and every one of you for being part of our dental community and joining us each week on this incredible journey. If you found value in today's episode and you don't want to miss out on future episodes packed with expert insights and actionable strategies, here's how you can stay connected with us. Firstly, hit that subscribe button. Whether you're listening on your favourite podcast platform or watching on our website, subscribing ensures you'll never miss an episode. Secondly, share the love. If you know a fellow dentist or colleague who could benefit from the wisdom and knowledge that we share here, please share our podcast with them. Also, please share the podcast on your socials by simply clicking on the social icons wherever you view or listen to this podcast. Together, we can all do our bit to elevate the dental profession. And finally, stay engaged with us. We love hearing from you. Your questions, comments, and feedback fuel our mission to provide the best content for your professional growth, your personal growth, and for your practice growth. Remember, your journey to creating a dental practice and a business life that you love is our mission, and we're excited to be your trusted guide along the way. Thank you for being a part of the Ultimate Dental Podcast. Until next time, keep smiling, keep striving, and keep on tuning in to the Ultimate Dental Podcast.